On the other side of the African continent, millions of refugees have fled the continuing civil war in South Sudan. The situation to the north in Sudan is no better. Thousands of refugees are pouring into the Middle East and Europe, fleeing persecution. Joining us now to discuss the situation is Jehanne Henry of Human Rights Watch. Jehanne, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
So let's get our viewers up to speed. South Sudan is the world's newest country. Explain why it was created, what the circumstances were that led to its creation.
Yeah, so there was a very long civil war in the giant country of Sudan that led to the Comprehensive Peace Agreement in 2005, and that paved the way for the independence of South Sudan through a referendum. So we saw South Sudan become independent in 2011, and only 2 years later, in December 2013, the country then became engulfed in its own new civil war. And the writing was on the wall for many observers that things were not going well. But it nevertheless, I think, shocked the world to see the extent of that destruction.
And that chaos has continued. Now, there was another peace agreement signed in December. Does that peace agreement hold any hope for bringing some renewed tranquility to South Sudan?
Correct. So there was first a peace agreement actually earlier in August in 2015, which didn't hold. And so we saw sort of this very fragile peace then fall apart again, and renewed conflict in Juba town in 2016 and also elsewhere in the country. And then, as you mentioned, the peace agreement, the cessation of hostilities in December. But it was violated, it was breached within hours of being inked. Right. So it is very difficult to believe that that is going to really bring an end to the violence and abuses, but there are people who still hold hope that the negotiations in Addis Ababa will succeed.
Now, as that civil war has gone on in South Sudan, there has been an outpouring of refugees, which has put enormous strain on the neighboring countries. Right. Uganda alone is playing host to more than 1 million South Sudanese. Yeah. How sustainable is that situation, and how difficult is the burden?
It's a very worrying situation, with about 2 million South Sudanese now outside of South Sudan in the region, many of them in Uganda, as you mentioned, also in Sudan, and in other neighboring countries, and also another 2 million people displaced inside South Sudan, living in UN protection sites and other camps. It has placed enormous pressure on the region. It's ripped apart the society, the fabric of society in South Sudan, where you have families separated from each other, you have whole villages, whole regions that are essentially now emptied out, and you have agricultural lands that should be farmed that are now just fallow. The destruction is enormous, and the cost, of course, is incredibly high, with requests constantly to the international community to foot the bill.
And if we look to the north, to Sudan, where Omar al-Bashir is the ruler, a history of persecution there. Thousands are leaving. What's taking place there that's causing people to want to get out?
So Sudan, the Sudan story is one of very long-term political repression, combined with serious civil wars inside Sudan. So we all might remember the Darfur genocide that some entities termed a genocide years ago, and that has not come to an end. There's still fighting in that region. There's fighting in 2 other states of Sudan, now near the border with South Sudan. So it's the new southern part of Sudan. And as a result of these wars, you have thousands of people trying to leave the country, as well as the economic situation. Right now in Sudan, the government recently announced its new budget, and it lifted austerity. It announced austerity measures, basically hiking the price for basic commodities, and people took to the streets again, demonstrating against it, and the government again cracked down very harshly, arresting and detaining scores of people who are still in detention right now.
In the minute or so that we have left, I want to turn to Israel and the issue, the problem that migrants, African migrants, many from Sudan, are facing in Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu has called them infiltrators. What does the government in Israel plan to do with these 40,000 or so people?
Well, we have been urging that they fix the asylum system, which falls far short of international standards. Sudanese and Eritreans in particular are there and certainly being urged in many various coercive ways to leave the country. The problem is in Sudan. Visiting a hostile country like Israel is in and of itself a crime. So, of course, there are refugee concerns and protection concerns for the population of Sudanese that Israel wants to now deport. And Israel has shown very little tolerance for its African refugees and migrants seeking refugee status.
Jehanne Henry, Human Rights Watch, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.